My name is Jason, and this is Just Watches. Alright, today we have a slightly older version of the San Martin Vintage GMT. This is an interesting homage from San Martin with some really nice features that has been generously lent in the channel for review by a friend. So as always, we will do pros, cons, and then if I think this watch is worth the money. However, before we begin, if you're enjoying the content of this channel, I invite you to subscribe, and if you like the contents of this individual video, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much. So price and availability, as of this recording, this watch is available on the San Martin website for $399. So starting with the case, it says 40.5 millimeters online, but I do measure 40 millimeters in diameter, 48 millimeters lug to lug. It's 13.5 millimeters thick, but a lot of that is that double domed sapphire crystal, and then you have a 20 millimeter lug width. As for finishing, it is brushed along the top. You have a nice high polished chamfer along the sides of the case and high polished sides. And then you have a very vintage look. There's no crown guards. You just have the crown at the 3 o'clock position. Now, one thing to note on a very flat case like this, where the lugs don't curve down, sometimes it sort of rides along the top of the wrist. It doesn't hug the wrist as much as a case that has nice curving down lugs. So that's just something to keep in mind. My Steinhart is very similar to this. I actually will show these side by side. And it's just the style of the case, but just keep that in mind. It will wear kind of like the lug to lug is a bit longer than it is in the specs. And then finally, sized up for my 6 3/4 inch wrist, it weighs 133 grams. So this 3-link style bracelet has solid end links and really good integration into the case. It is all brushed along the top, and then you have high polished sides that have these rivet style links. So this is gonna be a hate it or love it part of this watch. I'm not a huge fan of the rivets. You'll just have to decide if you like those or if you don't like those, but that is the bracelet that comes on this watch. So it starts at 20 millimeters, tapers down to 16 before jumping back up to 18 millimeters. Now on the newer version of this, the clasp is signed with the San Martin logo, and it has more than just 2 micro positions. So this is not a great thing to see. It's going to be difficult to get the perfect size for some people with only 2 micro positions of adjust. I think the new one has 5, and that's ideally what you'd want to have. The double push to plant clasp is all milled out, so that's nice to see. And then sizing is accomplished with screw links, which I always appreciate on a bracelet. Now usually I'll pay attention to the case back, but on this one it's completely sterile. Just a screw down sterile case back. So not much to see or say about here. So powering this watch is the Hangzhou 6460 GMT, which is a clone of the ETA 2836-2. So this is a 28,800 vibration per hour hacking hand-winding movement with a 40-hour power reserve. Now it doesn't give a stated accuracy, so I'm not sure what the tolerance range is for accuracy on these movements. And then it does have a quick set date, although it is blocked by the dial, so there is a ghost position. There is a date wheel in there, and you can feel it change. You just can't see it because there's no aperture for the date window. And then of course you do have that GMT hand, and that is adjustable via the crown as well. Speaking of that crown, it's 7 millimeters. It is signed with the older San Martin M, and it is knurled. It's a perfect size for operation of this watch, and the screw down action is quite smooth. The finishing isn't super high level of detail. It's just all high polish, but I do appreciate that they signed it. So I absolutely love the crystal they used for this watch. It is a domed sapphire with AR coating, so it makes it easy to read, and you can see you get some very cool distortions, and it's very proud of that bezel. It's sticking out probably like a full millimeter, and it just is it gives that very vintage feel of those old acrylic crystals they used to use that have the big dome, but you have the very scratch resistant sapphire here. So it kind of has the look of the vintage style, but you don't have to worry about scratching it up and then polishing it out with polywatch. So I also love the bezel on this watch. It is a sapphire bezel. So the red and the blue and the numerals, which are loomed by the way, are under a layer of sapphire. So it's going to be very scratch resistant as well. And it just has a cool visual effect overall. The action, it is unidirectional. It only turns in one direction. Technically for a GMT, it should go in either direction, but you see this on a lot of the more affordable homages where it's just a unidirectional bezel. And it is quite easy to turn. I can even do it with gloves here. I probably won't go all the way around. But the action is consistent, very clicky, and it is easy to use when you don't have a gloved hand. And then, of course, everything does line up, which is great to see. So the dial is a matte black. You can also get this watch with a white dial, but I really like the black dial here. It's a very warm overall feeling. Starting at the very edge of the dial, you have that half railroad track that designates each of the minutes, and it's in a very warm goldish tone. And then they use that kind of that aged yellow lume for all of the hour indices, and that kind of coincides when we get into the hands. All the color here is very coherent, and it has a very warm and inviting feel. They even, if you look at the bezel insert, it even looks like it's kind of faded. It's not a very bright or vivid set of colors, and overall this watch just feels very vintage, and they did a great job here overall on this dial. The lume is also very strong. Now moving on to the handset, you just have this classic handset. This is kind of a terrible time to look because they're all overlapping, but you do have that same gold tone, and they did a good job of matching the lume on the hands. And then you do have that long second hand that has a lume lollipop at the end. And then of course that GMT hand is just hiding under that minute hand, but it's nice and long. Actually, this is a good example of how long it is. You can still read the GMT hand even when the minute hand is overlapping it totally. On some GMTs, the GMT hand is a bit short and can get obscured, but not so in this case. So because I have both, I just wanted to quickly show these side by side. You can see the Steinhart Ocean 39 on the left. The ceramic, the colors are super bright, and then of course everything is silver tone with nice white lume. And you can see how different the vintage diver looks on the right with that aged yellow lume and all warm gold tones, and then those more muted, faded bezel colors with the blue and the red. So as you can see, the lume next to that Steinhart, the lume on this watch is just killer. I love that they lumed the whole bezel. It's very bright, very responsive. This is the kind of lume that you walk past a window for about 2 seconds and you look down at your wrist and the lume is just glowing from that brief exposure to the sun. So popping it on the Timegrapher, it does run just a little fast, about 19 seconds here. Healthy amplitude, minimal beat error, but I just don't really know the tolerances for these cloned movements, but yeah, this one's gaining about 17 to 19 seconds per day. So here is the watch on my 6 3/4-inch wrist. This is going to be a very crowd-pleasing size with 40mm case diameter. It is 48mm lug to lug. Just keep in mind it's very flat, and in practice that does make the watch feel, it kind of makes it feel like the lug to lug is a bit longer than it actually is because it doesn't really curve down. So it does kind of stay straight and flat across the wrist, and sometimes the watch will ride a little bit on the wrist up and down. It wouldn't do so much if the lugs curve down and the watch hugs, more around the arm. So just something to keep in mind. My Steinhart is the same way. It's just the shape and style of these cases, but that is what you get when you have a very flat case like this. So pros and cons, starting with the pros. Well, you have 200 meters of water resistance with the screw down crown. It's a really cohesive vintage feel, and you have that killer lume and that awesome domed sapphire crystal. As far as cons, I'm not a huge fan of the rivets on the bracelet, and then this clasp only has 2 micro positions. Now, if you get the newer version of this, you're not going to have to worry about that. Second, this is just an observation, but this is one of the more expensive San Martin watches. They offer a lot of value for money from what I've seen, but this one is $399, which I'll touch on more later. And then finally, you do have this cloned movement. Now, a lot of people swear by them, but I just don't have enough experience, especially long-term experience, to speak to them, and we saw this one is running a bit fast. So is this watch worth the money? Well, this watch is in a strange spot for me. I can't help but compare it to my Steinhart, another brand that does high quality homage watches. This watch is not quite as nice as the Steinhart in overall quality, but it does have a much better application of lume with that lumed bezel, and it is 2/3 of the price. Again, my main hesitation here is it's $399 for a watch with a cloned movement, and I just don't know enough about these clones to be able to say if I'm comfortable with that or not. So I do love the look of the style. It's really coherently designed. I just wonder if you might save a bit more and go for the Steinhart. That's really going to come up to you to decide. I think the value for money is definitely here. You just have to decide if you're comfortable with using that clone movement or you want to go with the Sellita or ETA that you would get in the Steinhart. So there you have it, the San Martin Vintage GMT. What do you guys think about this watch? Leave me a comment in the comment section below. Then as always, if you're enjoying the content of this channel, I invite you to subscribe. And if you like the contents of this individual video, please give a thumbs up. That's all for this time. My name is Jason, and you have been watching Just Watches.